This month's video is inspired by a letter I received from Norman. He's been enjoying my latest video on wagon weathering, but says, I enjoyed the video and the simple techniques inspired me to have a go myself with pleasing results. But I'm not satisfied with my attempts at the interiors, and as there are very few colour pictures of wagon interiors, it'd help if you could do a follow-up to help me achieve better results. I'm sure the hints for both open wooden and steel wagons, especially those that have been loaded with coal, would be interesting to many modelers. Now that's great. I love getting emails like that because I'm thinking to myself, you know what? You're right. We never cover the interior wagons. We talk about dirty wagons all the time, but realistically, we do the outside and then we just sort of skip over the inner bits. So let's have a look at dirtying up the insides of some wagons. I've had a quick sort of dig through my stocks of wagons, and I find this Oxford rail open. Now you can see I've already had a bit of a fiddle with the outside. I've used a fiberglass pen on some of the lettering just to fade it a bit, but the inside is still pretty clean, pretty much as Oxford supplied it. Now these things tend to come, and I think hopefully you can see this on the camera, they tend to come in a sort of brown colour inside, which is fair enough. Actually, Oxford's is pretty good. It's a pretty subtle and slightly grubby brown. Some wagons come really a sort of bright brown inside. The thing is, what they're trying to represent is unpainted wood, because the gist of it is, inside wagons, they didn't waste the paint. As soon as you started putting coal or any of the loads in, the paint all got chipped off, the wagon side got battered, and so the railway companies, being very parsimonious, simply didn't paint the inside. And I think the same thing applies to steel wagons. If they were painted, the paint got beaten off really quickly the first time you threw a lump of coal or iron ore or something like that in the back of them. So what we're looking to do is represent really unpainted wood. Now I do that with a bit of dry brushing. Probably seems a bit odd, and I've got a selection of colours here. A pale grey, in this case Humbrol Matte 64, a sort of browny colour, which in this case I've gone for Humbrol 118, and then this probably surprise you, this is Humbrol Metal Coat. It's gunmetal. Why using gunmetal? Well, the first thing to remember is that wood isn't brown. Never mind what you might think. Wood isn't brown. If you go and look at wood that's been outside any length of time, especially with no preservative on, it will be it will be at best a sort of greyish colour generally, because wood fades from the sort of fawny brown that it comes out of the tree to grey really quickly. And so arguably they ought to paint the inside of the wagon grey, because that would be nearer. But I think most modelers look at it and go, oh well, wood is brown, and therefore I want brown inside my wagon. That's fine, but it's not awfully realistic, and certainly when you're weathering you want to go nearer the grey. Right, so I'll start with a bit of grey. Now I'm using a Tamiya paint paddle here. I don't think this is a job that needs the best your best paints either. I think all of these paints are a little bit past their prime. But I'll start by picking up a bit of grey on there, and wipe the worst of it off on the paper towel, and then work it, dry brush. And it's not dry brushing trying to highlight detail, it's really trying to get a slightly streaky effect inside the wagon. I'm going to work on the basis I want a patchy grey in there. And I'm trying to follow the plank lines, because what I'm doing with the grey is and it's a fairly stiff brush. This is not one of my best brushes. It's one that's fairly tired and ideal for dry brushing. What I'm looking to do is to put some grain lines in there really quickly. This is not particularly subtle. It doesn't have to be, because this is only one part of the step. If you're feeling really keen and your wagon's suitably fitted, there should be ironwork on the inside of the wagon as well. You may want to dry brush a bit of rust colour over that one, but to be honest, I don't bother. I don't think you really notice that much, especially when the wagon's running around on the layout. Right, we've got a bit of grey in there. next up, I like to think, and I'm doing this fairly quickly before the paint dries. Then I want to go on to a bit of the brown colour. Again, it really is a slightly thicker paint. Again, exactly the same, bit of the brown. A sort of palish brown is where you're looking for. This is about as dark as I want to go. Again, I'm just whacking on a bit in there, trying to put the grain lines in. If I work fairly fast, what I'm hoping is that the grey and the brown will merge a little bit. I always find that works better if you can mix the paint on the wagon as much as possible. There we go. And already I think that floor is looking a bit better. It's looking more like real wood rather than plastic, which is obviously what the wagon is made of, but we are trying to represent real wood. And actually a lot of this technique will work just as well for anywhere else you're looking to represent wood. And then the finishing touch is a little bit, and I stress a little bit, of gunmetal. Now gunmetal is a metallic paint, so you get a little bit of shine on it, and that is quite appropriate for wood. It's a dark grey, so it'll blend with it nicely with the other ones, but again, not very much. Probably got a little bit much on this side because I'm trying to do it I'm doing it on camera. But there we go, a little bit of grey. Again, that little bit of sheen is quite appropriate for real wood. It's not always as matte as you'd like to think it is. There we are. This gunmetal actually is great as well because it works really well on all your metal bits. But we'll come to metal bits in a minute when I look at the steel wagon. And there we have it. That wagon now needs to dry overnight, really, because I want that paint absolutely rock solid before the next stage. And the next stage, bearing in mind this is a coal wagon, is to use a black wash. This is Agrax. I think it's Newlyn oil. It's a wash from Games Workshop. Games Workshop got places all over the country, so they're quite easy to get hold of. And it's designed to highlight the creases in their sort of slightly weird figure range and their clothes and that sort of thing. So if I take a wagon that I did yesterday. This started with a darker brown base colour. Ideally, so it's not shown up quite as well. But because this is a coal wagon, I'm going to use this black wash everywhere. They also do a brown wash as well, which is very useful for all sorts of wagons. But because it's a coal wagon, obviously I'm going to go for black, and that will just sit in all the it'll sit in all the plank lines, not panel lines. It'll sit in all the plank lines and look like you've got, and it'll sit in all the places that the dirt would easily catch. And you can see, just swash it around and let it get on with it. It'll do the job itself. Now that's going to dry reasonably quickly, because it's quite warm in the studio here today. That'll dry reasonably quickly, and it'll give me quite a nice finish to the inside of my wagon. As you can see, none of this stuff is particularly difficult. I wouldn't suggest you try it on your brand new, most expensive wagons, but there are lots of other ones. Now, I've also got here, this is a Bachmann wagon, which has had a bit of a wash on the outside, but it's a steel wagon. And obviously there's a subtle difference between the steel and the get the right paints out between the steel and the wood. In essentially, I'm still going to use the gunmetal, but I'm now going to use some rust as well. And I'm not even going to bother cleaning my brush from the last one, because that's how much of a rebel I am. There we go, bit of rusty colour now. That needs a bit of a mix up. So, these Tamiya paddles are really useful for this sort of thing, because you can get in there and you can wipe them clean, you can dunk them in turps, and if all else fails you can scrape the paint off afterwards using a knife or some sandpaper. little bit of that. Now, subtly different attempt with the steel wagon, in that I'm working upwards, always working upwards. And the reason I'm working upwards is because what I'm looking to do is highlight and show the rust as the stuff's poured in from the top, because you'll get an effect that is scratches down the inside of the wagon. So the stiffest, oldest brush you can find, scratches inside the wagon will be produced by very poor quality bristle. And there we are, a little bit of that. And then again, the same with the gunmetal, because obviously what's going to happen as the loads go into the wagon, they're going to be scratching the surface, and then the surface, being metal, will promptly rust. So what we're looking to do is effectively create the impression that that you've got bare metal being polished as the coal and stuff goes in, because it's being constantly dragged across the surface of the metal. And then once the wagon runs around, it gets a little bit wet. You've got the rust forming very, very quickly. Youngsters will not know this, but cars used to rust really badly. If anybody out there ever owned a Talbot Solara, they will know how fast metal rusts. Alfa Romeo owners will know the same thing. Again, working upwards though, always working upwards, because the coal's gone in that way, it's going to produce the scratches in that direction. And then finishing up with, in this case, I'll let the paint dry, but I'll finish up with a dose of the Newlyn oil in there, just to go around the corners of the wagon. There's less detail inside the wagon, so the Newlyn oil is going to have a lot less to grab hold of, but it's certainly worth getting some into the corners. You could also head off to using some weathering powders in there. Now, I'm quite a big fan of weathering powders. I'd certainly consider using them at this stage. Black weathering powders for bits of coal, because let's clear the decks a bit, get all this stuff out of the way. The finishing touch, which I'm not going to try and do today because it has to dry, but it is something that I really enjoy doing, is putting a little bit of crushed coal or weathering powder in the wagon, and just flooding it with a bit of watered down PVA in exactly the same way that you would do with ballast, and just letting a bit of coal left over in the wagon. Probably more in earlier wagons than in later ones. The thing about coal is it's actually very, very important, and it's quite expensive. They don't have mountains of coal sitting around the place. I know we tend to build motive power depots with coal spread everywhere. Truth is, coal was actually looked after, it was very strictly controlled, whereas ash was everywhere. So there would be a little bit of detritus, a bit of leftover coal in the bottom of these wagons, but absolutely not mountains of the stuff, but just that little bit looks like this wagon is earning its living. And it's that finishing touch I'm particularly proud of as far as these things go. But it is literally just coal, or whatever you're using as coal, crushed up really, really, really fine. Dust it into the corners, bit of water down PVA, and the job is done. Well, I hope, Norman, I hope that answers some of your questions. I'm hoping that it's inspired a few more people to go out and make their wagons dirty. And as ever, if you've got any more modelling questions you'd like to chuck our way, we are always happy and always looking for more subjects for our videos, and so we're always delighted to receive them. After all, we want you getting your hands dirty on your layout.